Let us pray. O God, our Father, give us your help today and through all the changing scenes of life. In difficulty, keep us from despair. In success, keep us from conceit. And when things go well, and keep us from thinking that we don't need you. Help us remember there's no situation in which you cannot help us, and no time in which we do not need your help. Grant us such wisdom of mind, such strength of will, such devotion of heart, may seek to do the things that please you through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This house is in session.
Announcement by your honor.
The Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation has sought permission to televise today's proceedings. A letter was sent to myself, and I do believe Honourable Leader of Government Business, a request was also sent to you. And I have granted such permission to the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation to televise today's proceedings in its entirety.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions. Papers. Government notices.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of the Gold Award Achievement Amendment Bill 2021.
Private members' notices. Notices of questions. Reports from select committees. First readings of bills.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers. Congratulatory and obituary speeches. Personal explanations. Motions for leave of absence. Oral replies to questions. Notice of motions for adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. Orders of the day.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Government business is the order of the day.
Order 9, sir. Order number 9, in the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of parcels of land at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christchurch in this island for the public purpose, namely housing development.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to present this matter to the Honourable House. This matter, Mr. Speaker, is essentially the acquisition of 2 parcels of land, one of 1,222.2 square meters, and the other 5,798.8 square meters, bringing a total of 7,021 square meters. Mr. Speaker, this is a very interesting acquisition, and I say that because in 2004, I was then a newly elected Member of Parliament to the constituency of Christchurch West. And during that first term, while the Barbados Labour Party formed the government, I was tasked with the very interesting opportunity that the then Prime Minister asked all members of Parliament to do, was to go to look, seek, and find any lands that may be available for housing in your particular constituency, so as to do what was then termed in 2003-2004 density reduction. And density reduction remained a theme for the Barbados Labour Party from then to now. And in my bright-eyed and bushy-tailed new Member of Parliament feeling, I was so happy to take the then Minister of Housing, now Ambassador, who was the member for the constituency of St. James South at the time. And I showed her these 2 parcels of land, expecting that in a matter of months or maybe a year at most, I would be able to see some housing coming out of this land in 2003. Needless to say, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed then, because 2003 went, 2004, 2005, 6, 7, 8, and then we lost government. So in 2008, when we demitted office, I said, well, clearly there was no chance now that we would get access to housing here in Sergeant's Village on this land. Little did I know, Mr. Speaker, that in 2021, how many years later, that task of finally acquiring that land would fall to the same person who had identified it in 2004. And more importantly, identified it at a time, and to be able to acquire it now at a time when there's such a great need for housing in this country. And if we thought that there was an acute need for housing then, imagine how much more it is today. Because what has happened, Mr. Speaker, is people have had to live under significantly stressed and stressful situations in housing in this country. In my own constituency, to give you an example of why we need housing for density reduction, an example that we know all too well in this country. A young couple is allocated a 2-bedroom unit. That couple has 3 or 4 children, sometimes more, 5. But they, because of their circumstances, continue to live in that 2-bedroom unit. And they spend years in that 2-bedroom unit. The children grow up in that 2-bedroom unit. Those 4 or 5 children become adults, but have no access to housing anywhere else. And they are forced to continue to live with their parents in that 2-bedroom unit. Those 4 or 5 children have children. So 4 or 5 children have 1 or 2 children themselves. So you end up with the 5 children, the 2 grandchildren, and then the 2 grandparents, and then the grandchildren, 4 or 5 of them. So you see housing situations with 2 bedrooms with 12 and 13 children, 12 and 13 people living in a 2-bedroom unit with a warm bathroom, having everybody to get ready to go to work or go to school or whatever it may be using that facility. And that has caused even more the acute need for us to do density reduction throughout and across the breadth of this country. Because I, Mr. Speaker, and as all the members on the Barbados Labour Party side, see housing as a human right for the people of this country. It is housing, and the access to housing and shelter is a basic human right, as the access to water is. This is why we changed the opportunity for people to access water. In the same way, we are trying desperately to build as many housing and as many housing solutions as we can across this nation. And I and my team at the National Housing Corporation, and I want to commend them, and the team at the Ministry of Housing, and I want to use this opportunity to commend them as well. We work tirelessly night and day to be able to find housing solutions, access to land, access to units, building houses, getting houses ready, especially for those that may be those without title. Spent a lot of time getting those without title, trying to get houses or land available for them. And then, lo and behold, we had a freak storm and a hurricane. Another 600 houses damaged, needing repairs, and 540 odd needing replacement. So that, another 1,100 houses needing some sort of attention on top of all of the other work that we were doing to get houses for people in this country. So it's a tremendous task that we have undertaken, but we are able and fit and ready to meet that task head on and putting our shoulder to the wheel. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I am so looking forward to when those first 150 East-West houses arrive here on this island, and when we can start to erect those as quickly as we can to get as many people housed as quickly as possible who were victims of Hurricane Elsa. But we have been very, very busy between the National Housing Corporation and the Ministry of Housing. Indeed, we were able to do many houses or partnership with other people to do houses. I was extremely happy to see the member for St. Lucie hand over the keys for one of the first 15 houses that we did at Todd's. And what was interesting, Mr. Speaker, is those houses, we actually started those 12 months before. And we know that housing takes time in Barbados. And unfortunately, it has made COVID and the effects of it has made building houses take even more time. Because at location to location, from time to time, we have had cases of COVID. We've had to shut down the building site. 2 weeks, get everybody tested before we can then restart. And of course, then we had the national shutdowns as well on top of that. So it's taken us some time. I'm not proud of it. And I push the contractors, or I push the National Housing Corporation, or the Urban Development Commission, or the rural, whoever I'm working with, to be able to get these houses finished as quickly as possible. Because time is money. And the longer you spend building a house, the more you have to pay in labor. The material prices have changed, yes, as well, and they have gone up, but the costing of labor, if that gets away, then you have a problem with housing. So I'm very happy that we were able to do 15 at Todd's. We also were able to do 7 houses at Carpenter's Glade. Those keys will be handed over shortly. We were able to do 3 houses at Sterling. 10 houses have started at Rice's. We were able to complete 6 houses at Farmers. 3 have started at Applewaite's. Almost completed 6 at Leadvale. We have 1 completed at Lower Burney and about to start another one very shortly. We have 20 at Parishland that have been started and about to be completed. And then in collaboration with Hope, the Hope program, there are 86 houses to be constructed at Lancaster, where the road is almost finished, and they've started 36 already. At Colleton, there are 70 houses. The road will soon, I imagine, will soon be started. At Poole, I saw the member for St. John meeting at Poole. We're about to start the design process for the road at Poole. And of course, we have the Hope Premium program with 250 odd. It's been in the news recently at Chancery Lane as well. So we have been very, very busy in the Ministry of Housing and in National Housing Corporation. And we're not finished. Because Sergeant's Village, this resolution that we're doing, will provide another 40 housing solutions for people in this country. Then we have another location at Coverley that will produce another 86 housing solutions for people in this country. We're about to send out the designs for the road. Then we have in St. George, we're doing another 60 as well. So we are continuing to look for places to build houses for people in this country. We also have another 40 acres at Lower Burney that we're going through a process to be able to access that for housing. There's another 30 acres at Searles that we're looking to access for housing as well. And then there are areas in St. Lucie that we're looking at housing as well. So, Mr. Speaker, the opportunities for housing in this country, the Prime Minister calls it a housing revolution. And this is what we are trying to get to. We're trying to provide as many house spots, as many houses, as many housing solutions as we can for as many people as we can. Because it does a number of things. It is what I call a win-win. It is an opportunity for the masons, carpenters, electricians, laborers, architects, designers, engineers, painters, horticulturalists, all types of people get opportunities when you do a housing development. Then the recipient or the beneficiary of the housing or the house gets an opportunity to own their piece of the rock. And of course, the government, through all the various transactions of increasing and improving the economy and enhancing economic activity so that we can see a return to growth in this country. So all through and at every stage of a housing development, there are opportunities for people to be able to benefit from housing developments. So we see this as a definite way forward, a definite way to improve the economy of this country, to get construction back on track, and turn our backs on the lost decade of the last administration, when hundreds and hundreds of artisans lost jobs and could not find work because the economy was such downtrodden. But this economy is looking positive. This opportunity to build more houses, renovate buildings, do and improve lives for people in Barbados is exactly what we hope to do with this. So, Mr. Speaker, I am proud and happy on multiple levels for this acquisition. This acquisition will give an opportunity to the people of Barbados to get another chance at a housing solution and own a piece of the rock. I am proud that it is the first acquisition that I am given the opportunity to do in the constituency, the great and wonderful constituency of Christchurch West, that has never failed me, be it in nomination or in election, in multiple times. And I have no doubt that all the recipients of these houses and housing solutions will be welcomed into the area of Sergeant's Village with open arms and with great blessings. This is a momentous and, in a way, emotional to know that it is an area that I first pointed out and now have had the opportunity to come and complete this acquisition once it goes through both houses. And I must also say that I will play an integral part in the design as well of the development. Not only the design of how the houses are placed, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I tend to have a flair and love for design. As you know, a very famous architect also said that form must follow function. And not only am I I play an interesting part in the design of the roads, but also in the design of the houses. And the Prime Minister and myself sometimes have interesting discussions as to how houses were designed, because she too has an interest and a flair for design. And I look forward to the day when we can see houses on what was vacant land for so many years. Houses that people of this country will have an opportunity to own. Houses that will see multiple generations enjoy, appreciate, use, and bequeath. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I ask that this resolution do now pass.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Sir, I thank you, and I commend and applaud the Honourable Minister for his evident passion. I know when it comes to housing development, building development, he's very much intimately involved in that aspect of endeavor, or at least he was up until he was appointed to this position. He obviously is not now involved in that. And I salute him for his sustained passion and interest in these things. I'm not too sure, Mr. Speaker, that I am altogether sure what he intends to communicate when he says that he will be intimately involved in the designs of these houses. I would have thought that perhaps that would have been an aspect of the development reserved for private sector professionals who are given to that task, or public service agents who have a responsibility and are paid to do those types of things. I would think that ultimately what is conceptualized might come to the minister's attention, but to hear him say that he will be intimately involved in the design of housing, I am still wrestling with that concept of a minister being involved at that level as to be intimately involved in the design of the project. Second thing he said that raises a question with me was that he was told in 2004 as a new MP, go, to use his words, go look, see in your constituency where we can put some houses. We were all told, he said. Now, it raises the issue as to how we determine, raises the issue as to how we determine where we are going to locate housing development. Then the minister conveyed to us the impression that it is by...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Honourable
It's a little too delicious to resist this point of order. But the honourable member, as I've spoken and said in this chamber before, when I first came to Parliament, the then Deputy Speaker sat on my left and the Leader of the Opposition sat on my right. And he too would well be aware that he would have been asked to go seek and find locations to put houses in his district. So for him to now come now and with some suggestion of trepidation or questioning when he knows full well he was tasked with a similar task suggests some sort of misleading this honourable House. And I would ask that he recall those wonderful days that we shared sitting next to each other, Mr. Speaker.
I do recall, Mr. Speaker, those wonderful days. I do recall, Mr. Speaker, those wonderful days that we shared and sat together in the Parliament in his early stint in the Honourable House. I do have some very good memories of those times, and I think that is why in debate in here, the dynamics that seem to apply, come into play between us, do. I don't happen to have the benefit, though, of the recollection to which the honourable member refers. For though we sat together and talked about many things, and of course in those days, Mr. Speaker, his pet subject was money. I sat, and when he, well, let's not go there. But I don't have the benefit of the kind of recall that the honourable member seems to have. And I don't recall anybody ever telling me to go and seek and to find space for housing. I do recall going and seeking and finding, but I don't recall being instructed so to do. I remember, in fact, carrying a number of my colleagues, Minister of Housing, Minister of Public Works, so 3 or 4 of them, into a place in Goodland, looking at potential space for a good housing development project. That space still wears grass to this day. And I would invite the honourable member to spend some time perhaps and explore the possibilities for potential housing development in Goodland. There was also talk of developing a housing project at the bottom of Goodland Goodland Road, where it intersects with Deacons Road and the road where Burger Pates is located, Exmouth off Spring Garden. So I invite him to go. There's some available land in those parts. But I still ask the question, so how do we determine where we're going to put housing once we recognize that we need to do something to increase the housing capacity available to Barbadians who are seeking? Will this housing development to go up at Sergeant's be in fact public housing, a public venture? I imagine that it is, since the Honourable Minister will be intimately involved in the designs. I also imagine that it will not be Chinese houses, since the Honourable Minister will be intimately involved in the designs, unless he himself had some part of the designing aspect of the Chinese houses, which I think they've arrived. May I ask through you, Mr. Speaker, if they have arrived? I heard last when said that they were not too far from arriving. But will this be public housing? And will it be, in fact, a further venture into the area of Chinese houses for Chinese designed and made houses for Barbadians? Now, it is true, and these episodes dot our parliamentary history with both administrations, both of the chief administrations that led this country, both administrations chiefly led this country. Government acquires land, and then by subsequent act, private sector interests are facilitated in access to that land for development purposes of various sorts. I don't imagine that at Sergeant's, and I'm not sure exactly where this land is at Sergeant's, but I would not want to think that this is another exercise, another episode, another instance of government acquiring land and then facilitating private sector developmental interests in that land. The most striking case that comes readily to mind is the one at Bay Street, where that land was acquired. Don't know if the process of compensation is fully completed. I do not know if it is a matter still to be adjudicated by any judicial process, but certainly there was much public controversy and concern over the acquisition at Bay Street by government, and then of course of lands to be passed over to private sector for development. We've seen structures demolished. We've seen large tracts of that area of land cleared. Presents a wonderful view to the southern western coast of Barbados, of urban Barbados, a wonderful view, and I really wish, to tell the truth, that it could be other than a building going up there, but that seems to offer the potential for so much else that can enhance the ambience of urban Barbados and Bridgetown City and still be of immense economic benefit to Barbados without facilitating a private sector development interest establishing a structure there that will take away from what potentially is a wonderful vista presented there on Lower Bay Street. But that's an instance, most recent, readily coming to mind, of the government acquiring land so that private sector interests might be facilitated in developing that for capital and wealth accumulation purposes, and incidentally to provide employment, hopefully for a number of Barbadians. And I come to that with this thought in mind. I remember not too long ago, and it has been a continuing saga, and I wonder if the Honourable Minister of Housing can speak to it, And this has to do with the 6 men's land issue. That was a major and controversial matter in Barbados. And I remember hearing much parliamentary debate in my younger days with reference to the 6 men's, the ownership of the land, government's role in acquiring the land, the presence of multiple scores of squatters on the land, intrusion or encroachment on the land by big business elements without even town and country planning permission, and certainly on lands which they did not have right title to. Now, really, these things seem to have receded into the distant rearview mirror, such that we can hardly see them anymore. And I wonder if the Honourable Minister is in a position to speak to that, because as far as I can recollect of any of it, that had to do with lands, title of which properly belonged seemingly to relatively unwealthed people from the Pine. That's a constituency, I think, of St. Michael's South Central, Southeast. That's you, my honourable friend. Well, maybe you can speak to it. I thought it was South Central. But if the honourable member of St. Michael's Southeast and the leader of the House can speak to it, I'd be happy to hear from anybody. I see the Minister of Housing insisting it is South Central. And I was of the opinion it was South Central, but if Southeast wants to claim it, it is all right. Yeah, it's part of the Pine. If Southeast wants to claim it, that is all right. That matter will be settled in a few months, one way or the other. And it might neither be my honourable friend immediately in front of me or my honourable friend to my left. But it is a problem, a matter that I have never heard of its resolution. And I wonder where we are with that. Because if those dynamics do in fact apply, that this is land owned by Barbadians with proper title, and that the hand of government was not involved in it fully legally, and that private interests have also been involved in depriving persons of what is their right by title without due compensation. I think that is a matter of which the minister ought to be briefed, apprised, and of which he ought to address if he is in a position so to do. I raised in this Parliament before the matter of acquisition of property relative to the Sam Lords development issue, and I don't know that that is fully resolved and compensation fully awarded to the rightful owners in relation to Sam Lords, but we have major development going on, or what was previously the Sam Lords Hotel up there, and the questions with respect to that project as it is now in process, questions of various aspects of it, which I don't necessarily want to get into today, but I'm seeking to find out whether or not full compensation has been given relative to those who had proper title of that specific piece of land and other lands related to the Sam Lords or ownership. These are serious matters, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't too sure that I would speak on the resolution. The minister obviously spoke briefly and spoke to the point, and I'm not going to delay the House any further on the matter. I just wanted to raise those issues because they're important to me. I know when it comes to the issue, the phenomenon of what we call squatting, those we call squatters. I think the member for St. Michael East refers to them as landless, people who are land deprived. We call them squatters, and we say what they're doing is squatting. And these are the small, pocketed, poor ones. And we try to address them either by reference to the law or by reference to government's generosity in its purse in providing alternative solutions to the need for land. But we have to address instances where the deep-pocketed ones also involve in some aspect of squatting, developing business concerns, encroaching on lands not properly theirs, especially without the planning approval of the requisite agency. So we're acquiring land at sergeants to develop housing for poor people in Barbados who are in need of it. If the minister is not going to be intimately involved in the design, but leave that to the professionals and the public servants, and if we are going to do that in such a proper way as to expedite the access to housing for poor people to address the problem that we continue to have, certainly I'm in support of that.
Honourable Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will seek to address one or two of the points raised by the Honourable Member for St. Michael West. I will start with the 6 men's. I'll start with 6 men's. First, let me say I can't get into the details, and the Honourable Member, I was debating whether I should get up and make him aware, because really we're not allowed to debate matters that are sub judice in this Honourable House. And that matter is still sub judice. So I really cannot get into the details of the matter. Less to say that, as he has brought it up, I am very, my colleagues would know that I'm very well aware of the situation. In fact, the matriarch of the family has since passed away, but that matter is sub judice. And we really cannot debate or discuss matters that are sub judice. So 6 men's, that is all I can say on that. With respect to intimately involved in design, I find that interesting that tickled the Honourable Member. And it took me back to a time when people were being moved from Emerton, and they were being moved to Clapham. And the Member of Parliament for the city of Bridgetown, where they were moving from, not only was she very much involved in the design of the houses that her people would be moving into in Clapham, but she went on the day that they were moving and checked every window and checked every door and made sure that the houses were fit and proper for her people who were moving from Emerton to go into. Well, I too, as a good representative of the people of Christchurch West, want to make sure that the houses that people will move into are good and proper and appropriate for them to be involved with. And I have a double reason, because it will be done under my watch as the Minister of Housing and the Member of Parliament. So, if my choice of the word intimate was wrong, I think maybe I should have said I will be very much involved to make sure that the housing, the standard of housing, that the quality of housing, that the people that would get an opportunity to benefit from those houses, that those houses will stand the test of time, that those houses will be of the highest quality, that the way that they are arranged will give proper egress and access to the people that will benefit from them. And that development will become a shining star for the National Housing Corporation. And yes, Mr. Speaker, that will be a development being done for and by the National Housing Corporation for the people of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the day when once this resolution passes both houses, that we will be able to break ground and start work at long last and get some more houses built for the people of Christchurch West and for the wider Barbados. Because all of us must understand that housing and shelter is a basic human right, and right for the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable member, you have to move for the passing of the resolution. The question is that the resolution do not pass. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Order number 13, sir, on the supplementary order paper. In the name of the Honourable Attorney General, to move the second reading of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021.
Honourable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I don't propose to detain the chamber long at all on this bill. But that is not in any way to reflect on the significance of the amendments that we are hoping to make to the Gold Award of Achievement Bill Act as it is currently in the laws of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that has characterized how we deal with national awards has tended to be the fact that we focus on the individual. And there's nothing wrong about that. Going back to the days of chivalry, you united gentlemen and conferred the equivalent title on ladies. Acts of heroism tended to be seen in a singular capacity, acts of bravery and so on. So we've always tended to award acts of individual achievement. And that has been the status quo throughout all of our legislation dealing with national honors. But more and more, and especially, Mr. Speaker, in the context of the challenges that beset islands like ours, we are forced to give recognition to the fact that individuals, while they can do a lot, teams of individuals can do a lot more. The Prime Minister's favorite mantra has been thus far that many hands make light work. And the most important amendment that is being made to this act today is to allow the Chancellor of the Honour to confer awards not just on individuals for high meritorious service, but also on groups of individuals. Now, I can safely say, and honestly say, that I do not have any notion of what is to come either this year, next year, or in the years after that. But if there's one thing that the COVID pandemic has made clear to me, and perhaps made clear to the members of this chamber, if not all of Barbados, is that teamwork is what it will take to get us out of our challenges. And you know, last year, Mr. Speaker, we were engaged in the exercise of conferring honors, and it had nothing at all to do with me. I'm not in any way involved in the process, but I do remember being in the periphery of a discussion, and we were talking about those individuals who, in the very early days of the COVID pandemic, had to brave the high seas to go out to the cruise ships, so that individuals on those cruise ships could have samples taken for testing. And we recognized that we had it wasn't just the person who did the test, it was also those gallant members of the Coast Guard who would ferry out the testing officers and those kinds of things. And it made clear to us that very often success in any human endeavor is not an individual achievement, it is an achievement by a group of people. And in our recent legislation, we've made provision for that, but we neglected to make similar provision in respect of the Gold Award of Achievement. This award of achievement was one that was crafted in contemplation of awards being given on Heroes Day. It sought then to recognize Barbadians individuals who have contributed in a significant way to our economic and social circumstances. But then we reflect on the fact that our economic and social circumstances must also take into account things like health and welfare. If anything, Mr. Speaker, in the last few weeks since we've been working on this bill, and I apologize to the Chamber for it coming this late, but as we consider the policy framework for the amendments to be made, it also recognized, Mr. Speaker, that every element, every aspect of Barbados's being is important and worthy of recognition and salutation. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not a complex piece of legislation at all. It attempts to do essentially two things. It attempts to make the Gold Award of Achievement available to groups of Barbadians, because we have Barbadians who, especially in the last year, have labored not individually, but labored together in the proverbial vineyard to lift all of Barbados out. I can speak of the police officers who have had to go above and beyond what you would consider normal policing duty, law enforcement duty, and lend their shoulders to the health professionals who are struggling with COVID. I can think of the Barbados Defense Force officers, Mr. Speaker, who together shored up the ambulance capacity, something that is an adjunct to what they do as soldiers. We can think of the transport board officers, transport board drivers who have been going out, prison officers. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making is that together we achieve much more than singly, and therefore this bill allows us to be able to recognize group achievement rather than just the achievement of the individual. The other element that this bill seeks to amend is to give us greater scope in making the awards so that it's not just limited to Heroes Day, but that awards can also be awarded on Independence Day. And so, Mr. Speaker, those are the two principal changes. The other clauses of the bill define, for these purposes, Independence Day. It makes clear that while the Act talks about a person, that a person includes a group of persons, and it also provides that where a group of persons are given collectively a Gold Award of Achievement, that each member of the group will be able to have the post-nominal letters GA. It is a simple bill, but in the context of where we are and what we're doing, the recognition that group or the group achievement or participation by more than one person is something that is to be lauded and recognized by our society. With those words, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, sir. Don't know that you will find any argument against the intention of this amendment to the Act. coming from here, we do need to be very disciplined. I've said that before. And always to be diligent about ensuring that we recognize those who give meritorious service to this country. We are engaged in the process of nation building. Nation building is not simply coming to this parliament and passing the laws. It's not simply about management of financial or fiscal policy. It involves so many different things, so many aspects of the life and well-being of the country that moves us from one level to the next, that takes us towards our ultimate goal of being the best we can be with what we have in the world in which we live, and that we pass that on to generations to follow us. So I support any change which would accommodate more than one person being identified as being worthy of a gold award. Most definitely they are, and the Honourable Attorney General made reference to some of them, and some of it is so obvious, especially in the last year and a half, as we've been struggling with the COVID issue here in Barbados. So many on the front lines doing their best at peril to themselves to keep us well and to serve us well, and these people are worthy of the highest form of recognition. I've said that before. It is not enough to say thank you. It was never enough to come on your porch or your gallery and on a Wednesday, I think it was, and clap your hand. That's fine. But I think people need to be recognized in very tangible ways where we are short of the financial capacity to remunerate people or to reward people in that way. Substitute, which is very useful, I think, is additional and extended holidays. That type of thing can be used. I certainly support the expansion of the concept that allows for a group to be awarded. I do think, however, careful thought should be given to that. The Honourable Attorney General mentioned very widely officers of the police force, I think Defence Force, drivers of the Transport Board. I think you very well need to set some very carefully thought through parameters to the numbers that are involved. And I don't think that that is a net that should be cast liberally, widely, but that there should be a numbers parameter that it is attaching, to that is employed there. I also think that where you're dealing with numbers that are specifically prescribed, even in that context where you're dealing with numbers and you do give the gold award to a group, there should be some consideration given to a monetary attachment when you're dealing with a group with respect to that award. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his most gracious support of this bill. It demonstrates, of course, that on matters of principle, we don't need to find ourselves on opposite sides, but we can stand shoulder to shoulder and maturely support important initiatives as we move forward together to make Barbados a better nation. Mr. Speaker, I therefore beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. And we think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Clause 1,
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
Question is that clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
Question is that clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 stand part.
Question is that clause 5 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, clauses 6 to 7.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 7 stand part.
Question is that clauses 6 and 7 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
Question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that we suspend
The question is that this bill be postponed for further consideration. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is postponed for further consideration.
Order number 12, sir. In the name of the Honourable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, Minister of National Security and Civil Service, to move the passing of a resolution that Parliament take note and approve the Charter of Barbados 2021.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning with a certain amount of humility, recognizing that what is before us today is a resolution to approve a document to be known as the Charter of Barbados 2021, that on the eve of our 55th anniversary of independence seeks to allow us to deal with the situation of setting out in one place the things that matter to us as a nation, that reflects our aspirations and that sets out our gratitude for those that went before, whose resilience and whose ingenuity, in spite of all of the odds, have allowed us to come here safely thus far, even with much grief, even with much tragedy, even with much success, even with much hope, with aspirations complete. And I say so, sir, because we felt as a government that much has been said about the fact that there are too many of our citizens who do not know and cannot find in one place those things that matter in nation building, those things that matter in the preservation of what we want to keep, those things that matter in terms of setting aspirations for where we want to go. And quite simply, to help us decide who we are reflected here, where we want to go, and the totality of what we want the nation to be as those citizens conferred with the honor of citizenship primarily, and those with the benefit of residency on this fair land. And sir, charters speak therefore very simply to the things that we want to be able to signal as important. And this charter is no different. The process by which we get here is equally one that has been consultative, that has allowed the participation of as many people as possible, and that allows us, therefore, to reflect not just the views of a small group, but the views of the broader society who have participated either in its settlement or in the consultative processes engaged by it. And I want at the outset to thank those members of the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee, but in particular, those who dealt with this issue and whose responsibility it was to be able to go to the country to frame out what ultimately this charter would look like. I want to publicly thank Ms. Sharita Granham and Senator Reverend John Rogers, both of whom co-chaired the committee that settled the framework for the charter and did extensive work in ensuring that they captured the key components of what we must capture as we go forward as a nation. Pursuant to the draft which they had, they started a process of consultation, and I'll go through the different levels so that we understand how comprehensive the consultation was. On the 25th of September, they met with the Social Justice Committee, a committee that was established by this government reflective of civil society and faith-based organizations in order to give them an opportunity to have a say in the affairs of government, a committee which did not exist before 2018. They met with the Social Justice Committee on the 25th of September. They met with them again on the 26th of September, both in closed sessions. On the 27th of September, they met with the Barbados Association of Retired Persons, closed session. On the 28th of September, they had their first public, live, televised, virtual town hall meeting. Obviously, because of the constraints with COVID, it was virtual, and that was streamed on not only YouTube and Facebook, but most importantly, on free TV, CBC TV Channel 8. And the purpose of that particular town hall, and they broke them up into different categories, that first town hall meeting was the proposed Charter of Barbados redefining the social contract. On the 30th of September, there was a second town hall meeting, also carried on Channel 8 and social media, Fundamental Principles, Rights and Freedoms, Duties of the State to Citizen, Citizen to State, and Emerging Rights. On the 30th of September, they met with the Barbados Council for the Disabled in a closed session. On the 2nd of October, they had the third televised virtual town hall, carried once again on Channel 8, YouTube, and Facebook. And that was on the role of the Barbadian diaspora in national development. On the 2nd of October, they had a closed session with the Anglican Diocese. On the 2nd of October, they had a closed session with other private individuals who had written in. On the 3rd of October, they met again with the Barbados Council for the Disabled. On the 3rd of October, they met with the LGBTQI community in a closed session. On the 4th of October, they had the fourth virtual town hall meeting. And the subject of that was the power of representation. Are we satisfied with our reflection? And that too was carried on Channel 8 as well as on YouTube and Facebook. On the 5th of October, they had a closed session with the faith-based community. On the 6th of October, they had the 5th town hall meeting, local governance and civic participation, a youth and creative perspective. And then finally, on the 8th of October, they had a live televised virtual town hall meeting. Throughout the engagements, the public was asked to consider, what are your thoughts on the new charter? How do you want to redefine the Barbadian social contract? What are our obligations to and amongst one another in this country? What do you want to see highlighted in a new charter of Barbados? And one of the reasons, sir, that we went in this direction is because we felt that it is important that persons highlight the things that matter to them so that we could capture the essence of it beyond that which we think we know, and hence the consultation. The work that was drafted, therefore, was further reflected upon and amended. But most importantly, the one major departure with this charter from the Constitution that currently exists and the other things that we have done as an independent nation is that there is no document that says to Barbadians that you have not only rights, but you also have a duty to take care of each other. And you have a duty to take care of this nation. And you have a duty to participate in the affairs of nation building as a form of active citizenship. So that this charter, sir, seeks to set out very, very clearly the precepts of not only rights, but the recognition that the only people who will take care of this fair land are Barbadians themselves and those choosing to live here. And if that is the case, sir, then we need to be able to remind each and every one of us. So whether it is that teacher in a primary school teaching the precepts of what the Charter is, or whether it is a university student, or whether it is a worker, or whether it is an artist, or regardless of whoever it is, that we begin to understand that this nation is not going to take care of itself or by serendipity or by hope, but that it requires the daily actions and efforts of the majority of us. Do we expect it to be all? No. Because we understand that there is no perfection given to man. There is no perfection given to nation building. There is no perfection given to almost anything, because that belongs to the divine. But what we do understand, however, is that more often than not, the majority choose to want to uplift and to do things that are uplifting in themselves. And let us take a simple analogy, a house. A house that receives no maintenance, a house that receives no love, is a house that over the passage of time will fall away. Is a house that if it is a board house and the elements keep beating upon it, the paint starts to chip and move away. And once that paint moves away, the weather then goes at the wood itself. And it is only a matter of time before the wood then starts to be affected and starts to rot. A tree that is left to grow on its own might be stunted or might grow in a way that is uncontrollable. Mr. Speaker, the state of nationhood requires nurturing, requires building, requires pruning, requires all of those things in order to keep it active and purposeful for the benefit of the citizens and residents of that nation, to create the platform for prosperity, yes, but at all times to protect according to the law, to ensure the rule of law, to guarantee fairness, especially in a country such as ours, where so much of our history was rooted in iniquity and unfairness, and above all else, Mr. Speaker, to ensure order. Because without order, as you know, sir, there is anarchy. Sir, this is not easy. And I ask us to think of the journey not just from 1625, but from before. And the historians will tell us, sir, that this country, regrettably, was one of those countries, if not the first, to have seen genocide in the Americas. Recognizing that those who lived here before us, the Amerindians, the Caribs, left before the British came in 1625. The evidence of their having lived in Barbados was clear for all to see. But their presence was not found. And the more the research comes out from historical documents, the more we understand what potentially could have happened and probably did happen. We only need to reflect on the journey of Lord Willoughby to St. Vincent to meet with the St. Vincent Caribs, where it is said that he also met with the Barbadian Caribs. And in signing a treaty, guaranteed to the Caribs the right of free passage, including coming back to Barbados, those who were Bajan, but at the same time, getting their cooperation to be able to contain the movement of any African slave who would have left the land, such that they would return them back to our nation. The truth is that that treaty did not last long, because once the British decided they were going into St. Vincent to establish plantations, they then went to war with the Caribs, and we all know what happened there. The Caribs prevailed over them, and therefore the promises given to the Barbadian Caribs were never honored by the British in Barbados. But we don't have to go so far back then. We come now to 1625 and go forward. And we come to the reality of what happened in those days. Because that reality, sir, led to the most unfortunate set of developments, where in 1636 Governor Hawley in council declared that all Africans brought to this island would be the subject of enslavement and would not have the right to freedom. And this, Mr. Speaker, was given expression 25 years later in the iniquitous, oppressive, and awful document passed by this Parliament known as the Slave Code of Barbados. And that slave code, sir, came to be replicated and used in countries across the Americas, and was singularly responsible for the maiming, disfiguring, torture, and yes, even loss of life of probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of black enslaved people in the Americas. When this charter therefore speaks to this Parliament being an instrument of oppression in its past, but equally too a tool of empowerment, we begin to understand why it is cast in those terms. Because whether we like it or not, we cannot change the facts of history. But we must come to terms with them, and we must determine that which we must never repeat if we are to remain faithful to our wanting to be able to forge a new society that is not created in the depths of iniquity, but that is reflective of the values and ideals that are best known to mankind, both through the constituent documents of countries and international organizations like the United Nations, or indeed rooted in all of the different religious practices and religions that our people subscribe to and have faith with. Love is universal. Respect is universal. The values of honesty, commitment, dedication, all of the things that we know that are needed in order to nurture nationhood, in order to build a country, in order to forge forward with a civilization, becoming stronger with each generation. These principles and these values are important. And this charter, Mr. Speaker, is premised on 5 articles. And let me say at the outset that it is not a legal document. Never has been, never will be. It is a document, however, that reflects how the majority feel, but that is committed to the protection of all, not just the majority, but all. Because the role of a government is to confer the benefits of the protection of the rule of law, as I said earlier, the precepts of fairness on its people, while insisting that order remain to avoid anarchy. And Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that this document got its widest possible ownership, the 15 sessions conducted by the committee, not the government, the committee, were undertaken to provide for that. Would I have wished that we could have done this in a non-COVID environment? Of course. But can any of us tell each other when COVID is going to be rid from the earth, particularly with what we see happening elsewhere? We know that the doctors tell us that it is likely to be endemic. In other words, that it is likely to be with us. If not always, for a very long time. And that we wait, as has happened elsewhere with medical progress and research, further therapeutics, not just vaccinations, things that will help us to treat it more effectively. We see stories of pills from Merck and Pfizer. We have continued work being done on vaccines. We have people taking booster shots. We have at least the protection that can save lives for the most part. And that is why the vaccine exists first and foremost, to be able to save lives and to reduce the level of sickness and pressure on our healthcare systems, which will then have a deleterious impact on those suffering from other diseases or who are the victims of accidents or other things that may cause them to seek medical attention. So we accept that this is not ideal in terms of timing. But it wasn't ideal 100 years ago too, or 80 years ago, when people had to confront the realities of the times in which they lived, because progress can't stand still. And the one thing we can't do is to stagnate, because stagnation, as we know, even with a pool of water, becomes a public health risk that can cause serious problems to persons. But at the same time, we're conscious that as we move forward, just as the United States of America under the late Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a person I know, much respected by the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, many of his policies, just as he faced grave difficulties in addressing the issues of trying to create a New Deal in the 1930s and 40s, coming on the heels of the then pandemic, the Spanish flu, and the Great Depression, and the extent of deprivation that was running through the country, with people losing all that they had and not able to feed themselves and their families, banks not being able to function in the way in which they were intended. All of these things happened. But he understood that he had to level the road and to take a clear path through the middle, recognizing that for some who may have wanted more aggressive action, that he had to carry as many with him, and therefore that was not possible. And for others who wanted to retain the status quo, that definitely was not possible because of the level of deprivation and starvation even that was taking place in the country in which he was expected to be able to lead. And there's a quotation that I want to read from him. Because in a very real sense, when we look at the work of the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams and the work of the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, the one thing that people will tell you about the DNA of this nation is that Barbados holds the center and holds the core. Could Sir Grantley have been more revolutionary? Of course, there are people who wish that he was. Could Errol Walton Barrow have been more so? Of course, there are people who wish that he was. Could they have resisted equally the status quo, conferred benefits on the status quo in a way that others wanted them to? Of course they could have, but they chose not to. And they knew that they had to depart from the status quo. But in departing from the status quo, they tried to carry as many with them as possible. And hence, the kind of revolutionary action that others had hoped for was not necessarily the legacy which they have left us. Was there substantial progress under both of them? Absolutely, without fear of contradiction. And it caused me, therefore, Mr. Speaker, to reflect and to think of this quotation from FDR. where he said, and I quote, "Say that civilization is a tree which, as it grows, continually produces rot and dead wood." It's a living organism. The radical says, cut it down. The conservative says, don't touch it. The liberal compromises and says, let's prune so that we lose neither the old trunk nor the new branches. This campaign is waged to teach the country to march upon its appointed course, the way of change, an orderly march, avoiding alike the revolution of radicalism and the revolution of conservatism. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is perhaps one of the closest quotations that describes the orderly march of Barbados as we have gone forward. This is the country, as I said, that regrettably the modern institution of racism was forged in the post-1625 settlement of this nation. This is the country that settled the slave code. This is the country that said to people, you cannot vote unless you own property. But after emancipation, there was no settlement for slaves to own property. So they were at the mercy of those who chose to help them, if they did at all. This is the country that after 1816 and 1818 or so, when they couldn't hang and didn't want to hang anymore because of the Bussa Rebellion, sent people to Honduras. And Honduras said, no, we don't want these 123 Bajans. Send them to Sierra Leone, to that part of Africa that became Sierra Leone. And when those Bajans wrote Queen Victoria and said, can we go back to the land of our birth? They said, no. She said, no. I will send you to Jamaica, but you can't go back to Barbados. And they said, no, we don't know Jamaica, so we will have to stay where we are here in Africa. This is the kind of manipulation that people were subjected to. This is the country that continued with that farce of not allowing people to be able to have the right to vote until Sir Grantley Herbert Adams passed the Universal Adult Suffrage Act in 1950, giving people for the first time in 1951 over the age of 21 the right to vote in this country without reference to property. This is the country that said it was okay to discriminate against women up until 1945, when the right to vote was given to women. Women couldn't, it was worse than children. You couldn't be seen, you couldn't be heard. And with that right to vote given to women, emerged Dame Ermintrude Bourne as the first member of Parliament for this party in the parish of St. Andrew, led by then same Sir Grantley. Mr. Speaker, this is the country that said to women who wanted to be nurses and teachers and civil servants that take care. If you go and get married, you have to resign from the public service. If you go and get pregnant, you have to resign from the public service. We need to tell these stories to our children today because they must understand that we didn't land out of the sky where we are today, and that the trials and tribulations were fought off by a resilient people. Not overnight either. They had to fight for decades and centuries, depending on the battle. And because of that, this is the country that now says that we must have a guideline to ensure that we must never, 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 never reflect any ounce of discrimination against any human being in this nation, if we are to be fair to the battles and to honor the battles fought by our ancestors, and if we are to be fair to the precepts of human dignity that we believe in, whether as a nation or spiritually so. This is the nation that must never repeat the tyrannical episodes of history that have taken too many to the great beyond without knowing what it is to be afforded the dignity of respect, of fairness, of equality of opportunity, and most importantly, of freedom. And Mr. Speaker, I say so today because for the first time in 32 years of active political engagement in this nation, I ask us to reflect on who we really want to be. What kind of person do we want to be? What kind of nation do we want to build? Do we believe that there should be any part of us that should want to repeat and echo the iniquitous behavior that can say that one man is greater than another? I went to the United Nations in September and I quoted from Bob Marley about getting up and standing up and talking about global moral strategic leadership. I come to our own parliament today, the third oldest parliament in the Commonwealth. A parliament, while being the third oldest, has not always exhibited the values that it should. And I ask us to recognize that those of us who are children of independence have a greater duty to ensure that what we do does not in any way reflect the character, tone, or immorality of what went before. We live in a complex world. We don't all look like each other. We don't even all look like each other in here. We don't all talk like each other. We don't even talk like each other in here. We're not all tall, we're not all short, we're not all fat, we're all not skinny. Some are bald, some have hair, some got locks, some trying to get locks. You ain't trying, sir, you got. They tell me I may have one or two sometimes. But the point is that we live in a complex world. And that's why the world has been driven by what, as growing up, we would say the isms and the schisms that have come to separate people. And if you look at the pathway of history, history does not come in a straight line, as President Obama says all the time. You have peaks and valleys. But the key is, as economists would look at, is there a line that the trajectory is going in the right direction? And I believe so. But the world is at that moment again. And you know why I'm so reflective, sir? In 2018, at the same UN, I spoke about, regrettably, how similar the world looked to what it looked like 100 years ago. Little did I know, having given that speech in 2018 and 2019, that we would have the pandemic of 100 years ago, and that we would see the seeds being sown for a debt crisis and for recession among many nations of the world. We had already begun to see in 2018 elements of populism and nationalism that looked a little too much like what existed and what ultimately was only quelled by the passage of the great wars, particularly World War II. Because after World War II, the world settled on the Charter of the United Nations that sought to at least give some level of equality of opportunity and freedom to all human beings. Cognizant, don't get tired, that it was also preserving inequity because it took the world where it found it. And hence that is why many of us have argued that there is a need for affirmative action and economic enfranchisement as the order of the day, even as we accept the equality of opportunities of mankind being conferred by the Charter of the United Nations. It took that war to quell the worst of human nature. It took that war to quell the populism and the greed that was reflected by so many nations in Europe particularly, in America. The same FDR didn't have it all easy. He had people like Huey Long and others who were insisting on narrowing the rights of people. And that has been the battle throughout history. I choose just to talk about the last century because that is in the immediate recollection of most of us. But if you go further and further and further and further back, you will find examples of this, just as you'll find examples of pandemics throughout history. And we understand, therefore, the angst and the anxiety that can happen. But what we must never lose sight of is the moral compass necessary for us to maintain the focus on the protection of the dignity of each human being. The complexity of beliefs, the complexity of interests, the complexity of physical structure, racial character, religious persuasion, all of these things are complex. But it was the member for St. Peter who last night, as we discussed this, reflected that it is the right of persons to choose. I may not agree with their choice, he said, but it is their right to choose, because that is an essential component of human dignity. And that is all that this charter seeks to do, sir, to protect the citizens of this nation and the people who choose to live in this nation in a way that does not in any way cause them to suffer the indignity of those who were the victims of discrimination of any type in Barbados. And so we reached the charter. The public feedback was mixed, as we would expect, because this is a country that is reflective of many different races, classes. The generational division is real, as I've said for many years, perhaps more real than even the racial and class divisions. And I'm seeing it in very, very clear ways, even as we seek to guide this country along the pathway of progress. Gender. There was some who thought that this was the Constitution that we were trying to do. And even as we have these discussions, we have to continue to remind people this is not the Constitution of Barbados. This is not the preamble for the existing or future Constitution. This is simply a charter that says these are the things that matter to us, and this is the kind of people that we would like to be, and the kind of country we would like to have. And the truth is that all who are involved in nation building know that the process of nation building does not come, as I say, in a straight line. Yes, we shall strive for perfection, but perfection doesn't always come or be achieved immediately. But that does not remove from us the right to strive. I have always found comfort in a line from the Talmud. Yes, a Jewish document, religious document, that says we are not expected to complete the task, but neither are we at liberty to resile from it. We may make mistakes, but the mistakes we make must never result from faintness of heart or from the abandonment of our principles and values. That is a fact. Because we know that divinity is reserved for God, or whatever God you preach is your God, but not for human beings. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the document which is here, we argued, is important as a signpost for persons who want to live here and who want to help chart out the path of nationhood. There were issues pertaining to different aspects of our history, from the same slave code to issues pertaining to land ownership, to greater community engagement through local governance. And I'm happy to report to this Honourable House that we have finally, as a cabinet, taken the report of the Thorne Commission on governance, local governance, and we have given them the authority to start consulting with the Barbadian public over the next few months as to their recommendations now, having had 18 months of consultation as to the content that people would like to see in this document. No different from the consultations which have been done here. They spoke to the need for parliamentary reform. They spoke to the need for a matter of a Citizens Advice Bureau, of freedom of information legislation, which I know the Minister of Information is working on. They spoke to the greater enforcement of human rights. They spoke to the question of the rights of the child. They spoke to what family rights should be. They spoke to this issue of creative, which Senator Reverend Rogers is dealing with in the back page of The Nation today, along with other members of the religious community. And I really do trust and hope that they will understand that there is no intention to demean anyone. And in fact, as we have said, the assertion to protect the rights of all is not an assertion to denigrate or to remove from anyone their individual rights. None. The promotion of individual rights for all is not an assertion to take away or to denigrate the rights or the morals of any person in this country. We are all human beings, and we all have been given the gift of life, but we must also be given the gift of human dignity and the protection of the law. That is who we are. And we are more so committed to that because of what I referred to earlier with respect to the location of genocide against the indigenous persons of this land and brutality against the persons who were then subjected to slavery in this land. Mr. Speaker, this charter tries to ensure that it is gender neutral as far as possible. It makes sure that we keep to principles as far as possible without delving into the details, because we understand that the deep dive into the details is the work of policy and laws and other things that may come. But what is necessary is an overarching framework that says this is what and who we can aspire to. And Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is that when we look through the 5 articles in the Charter, we are very clearly seeing a commitment to make a few assertions. Article 1 says that all Barbadians are born free and are equal in human dignity and rights regardless of age, race, ethnicity, faith, class, cultural and educational background, ability, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that it is critical that we state this for the reasons that I just gave just now as to the history of this country and indeed the history of this Parliament with respect to discrimination. Indeed, sir, this Parliament has already passed anti-discrimination legislation in this term that protects the rights of each and every Barbadian against non-discrimination. Similarly, sir, this Charter speaks in Article 2 to what I referred to as the precepts of active citizenship in Articles 2, 3, and 4. 1. In Article 2, we say that everyone in Barbados has a duty to care for each other. A most important statement. A duty to care for each other. Because I'm satisfied, sir, that if every one of us carries along somebody, then any suffering can be reduced significantly, and we can then have the opportunity to carry our relationships to a level that will allow a platform of productivity and prosperity to come so that all of us can benefit. Everyone has a duty to care for each other and to ensure that our relationships are at all times characterized by courtesy. So we're telling our little children, we want you to be courteous, civility, and mutual respect. We're telling our adults, we want you to be courteous, to be civil, and to respect each other irrespective of the differences that you may have. Why? Because every war, every crime, every act of violence is really rooted in a lack of respect, a lack of appreciation of the importance of life to that other person. As you know, Mr. Speaker, as a person who practices law in this area where persons are hurt, injured, or have their lives lost. We remain conscious, the article goes on to say, that every generation is indebted to those generations that preceded it and is morally obligated to the one that follows. In other words, sir, we are here only holding in trust for the generations that are to succeed us. But we are conscious that we are also only here because of the efforts made by those who went before to pave a way for us to live the kind of life that we are living. And it is for that reason then that we go on to Article 3 that speaks very clearly to every Barbadian, and it says every Barbadian has the right and a duty to participate in the economic, political, and social life of Barbados as an expression of active citizenship. Every Barbadian has the right to vote and to seek public office in accordance with the laws of this country. And Mr. Speaker, this notion of active citizenship, duty to care for each other, duty to participate in the social, economic, and political landscape, goes back to the points I made earlier about why a house needs nurturing and maintenance, and a nation needs nurturing. Because left to themselves and the passage of time, destruction or atrophy will follow. Mr. Speaker, in Article 4, we continue the theme of active citizenship, where it says, and I quote, everyone has the right to live in a healthy and balanced environment and has a duty to participate in its preservation, conservation, enhancement, and regeneration. We appreciate the defining importance of our land and our sea to our identity and way of life, and therefore also pledge to protect the free and unrestricted access to all of our beaches and public spaces, which is an inalienable right of every Barbadian. Mr. Speaker, that is who we are. But the Charter just doesn't only reflect what the Constitution said in terms of rights, but it imposes this responsibility of duty. And this is so fundamental to the change that we need to go forward. Mr. Speaker, no one owes us a living in this world. And we know that intrinsically because we are fighting the battles in the global community. I leave this Parliament to go and participate in another debate on the establishment of a resilience and sustainability trust in the IMF because countries like our own are not permitted to be able to access concessional funding, even though we have to fight the battle of our lives with respect to preparing this country for a climate that is going to be most inhospitable. And in this year of our Lord, we have already experienced it, so I don't have to ask you to carry your minds there, because every Barbadian has known what it is this year to live through ashfall, to live through a freak storm with 46,000 lightning strikes in 90 minutes. Every time I say it, I won't believe it if I'm watching a movie. And then to deal with Hurricane Elsa that ravaged the stability of so many Barbadian families, just under 2,000 Barbadian families for who the Minister of Housing is doing his best to ensure that we can give them back stability, because 90% of them were below the poverty line and 95% of them were uninsured. And why? Because the cost of insurance becomes even more unaffordable in this world with a climate crisis. So, Mr. Speaker, all we seek to do here is to promote the concept of active citizenship. Because without active citizenship, the country will not make the distance. Yesterday afternoon, we spent our time with the private sector, reflecting on what is happening with the disruption of the supply chain and the extent to which the price of freight in every instance for the last 9 months has gone up and continues to go up. And how do we, in spite of being in an IMF program, in spite of fighting a pandemic, how do we try to ensure that we can protect them literally from falling under as enterprises, but also protect, most importantly, the consumers of this nation who have been victim now, like the rest of the consumers globally, to a disruption that has taken place largely because of the pandemic, but made worse by other items like what happened in the Suez Canal with the ship literally blocking the traffic, moving in the canal for almost a week. All of these things have an impact. And Mr. Speaker, we therefore recognize that if no one owes us a living, then we have to work doubly hard. We do it in our families, we do it in our households. We must do it in our country. And the opportunities are not only what are presented within the 166 square miles of this land, it's the opportunities in our maritime environment. It's the opportunities in our region. It's the opportunities globally. And that is why we create bridges to give people as many chances and opportunities as possible with respect to this. And that is why Article 5, Mr. Speaker, is on engaging the world. And basically states clearly that Barbados is part of a global community with strong international relations, and recognizing, and I read it, Barbados is part of a global community and strong international relations with other states is vital to its national development. As a small island state, we must exist harmoniously with others and work collaboratively to preserve global public goods. We will honor our international obligations while championing the causes that are important to safeguarding the future prosperity and stability of Barbados and the Caribbean. And hence, this particular article promotes multilateralism, reminds us why we must engage the world and how we do so as a small island state, promotes South-South cooperation, and promotes, Mr. Speaker, regionalism. Caribbean integration as a means of sustaining the Caribbean civilization. Mr. Speaker, these are the primary articles of this. But what does it mean? This is intended to be able to deal and to provide the kind of tone and the kind of flavor that this government and future governments, we hope, members of the private sector, members of the labor movement, members of every form and facet of social and economic endeavor in this country, will use as a guide to what kind of society we want. So whether it is single mothers, whether it is persons who have been feeling marginalized because this country does not see them or does not recognize them, whether it is small businesses or larger enterprises. What is significant, Mr. Speaker, is that in this land of our birth, there must be a place for each and every one. What is significant, sir, in this land of our birth? That we work to ensure that every Barbadian who wants opportunity be given that opportunity, and who can utilize that opportunity be afforded the ease. Because sometimes it is just too difficult to do things. And why is it that we're working so hard to change the kind of Barbados that we want, that we have inherited, to the one that we want? Mr. Speaker, a person should not be condemned because they pass for a newer secondary school in this land. A person should not be condemned because they chose not to get married. A person should not be condemned because they do not have access to a piece of land at this point in time but want to be able to have access to it. Or alternatively, they may do like a certain lawyer who has gone to the great beyond, who say he don't want to own the land, he can rent for the rest of his life because he ain't got the children. That's their right to choose, as the member for St. Peter would say. We want to be able to ensure that we don't have debates about whether a person can go to school with their hair in plaits or braids or locks. We want to be able to have discussions that stop people from feeling that because you're overweight that you are a pariah. We want to be able in this country to allow people to have the right to choose. Amartya Sen, that great development practitioner, freedom, said in his book, freedom is the right to choose. And as we set forth on this new journey as a parliamentary republic, sir, we believe that it is fundamental to all, that we protect those rights of our people, but that we equally remind our people that rights without responsibilities is a Pyrrhic victory, is an empty victory, is a victory that carries us nowhere. Because you will have all the rights that you want, but the country that you call your own will not be able to produce for you unless we work collectively as a nation to make this country the best that it can be, providing for as many, if not all, of our citizens as possible in a fair manner. And that is why the Charter, my friend, Mr. Speaker, ends in this way. And I really can think of no better way to end my contribution in this debate. As I invite all Barbadians to reflect on this document, not as a 2021 document alone, but as one for the ages, as one that does not prescribe for anyone any particular legal right because it is not a legal document, but as one that says that as a guide for how we may want to behave and we may want to treat to each other, let this stand as a reference point for those who ask and who want to know, but equally for those who are being guided along the path of life or along the path of engagement of communities or the engagement in business practices. And what is the conclusion of this document, sir? And I quote, "We, the people of this great nation, Barbados, encouraged by the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us, stand on the threshold of a bright future, and we boldly embrace and solemnly affirm the aspirations contained in this Charter of Barbados. May the hope it engenders permeate the length and breadth of this nation and distinguish it as a land of equal opportunity and enfranchisement, fairness and social justice, peace and security, and solidarity and cooperation. May the commitment we now champion progressively foster and nurture the soul of our nation from generation to generation." Mr. Speaker, may God bless this nation, whichever God you worship, and may the people of this country stand united in its defense, conscious that while it may have been the responsibility of others to take care of it, or to do that which they wanted to do before they accepted the duty to take care of it, we learned 55 years ago that it was our responsibility to start that journey. And we have done well in many things, but we can do better in some. And in trying to do better, we want to create that space and that place where human beings feel that they can work together in a common purpose without necessarily having to mimic each other, without having to be the same as the other, but in a common mission rooted by common values. Then I truly believe, sir, that this nation will go to greater heights, and in strength and unity we shall prevail. I ask the honourable members of this chamber, as I do the people of this nation, to treat with respect and dignity each other, and to understand that this charter is simply a guide for how we believe as a nation and as a people we should be to ourselves, to each other, and to the nation of Barbados. May God bless this nation. I thank you. I beg to move, sir. I beg to move that this resolution do now pass. I reserve your right to speak.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:15 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:15 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:15 p.m.